Marcus Thompson sits in his private jet, staring at the bankruptcy papers of Skyline Air spread across his mahogany desk. Just 72 hours ago, he was their most valued passenger. Now, he's the reason their stock price crashed to zero. The flight attendant who refused him service never imagined the quiet businessman in seat 12A owned the largest airline consortium in America. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and revenge, let me know where you're watching, from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unbelievable true stories that will leave you speechless. You won't believe what happens when one moment of discrimination costs an entire airline their future. Let's see how one ordinary Tuesday became the most expensive mistake in aviation history. Tuesday morning in Atlanta started like any other for Marcus Thompson. The 45-year-old CEO of AeroVantage Holdings had built his empire from nothing, transforming a small charter service into the largest airline consortium in America. His company controlled 43% of domestic air travel, owning partnerships with hundreds of airlines worldwide. Yet despite commanding a fleet of private jets, Marcus maintained a monthly tradition that kept him connected to the reality of commercial aviation. Walking through Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Marcus looked nothing like the billionaire he was. His faded jeans, worn sneakers, and simple black hoodie made him blend seamlessly with ordinary travelers. A weathered backpack slung over his shoulder contained documents that would determine the fate of 3 regional airlines he was considering acquiring. To any observer, he appeared to be just another passenger heading to Chicago for business. Skyline Air Flight 447 sat at Gate B12, its gleaming fuselage bearing the logo of an airline that had served customers for 37 years. Marcus had deliberately chosen Skyline Air for this trip, knowing they held several lucrative contracts with his subsidiaries. He wanted to experience their service firsthand before renewing agreements worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The first-class cabin welcomed him with its signature blue leather seats and polished wood accents. Only 3 other passengers occupied the premium section. Margaret Whitfield, wife of Senator Robert Whitfield, held court in seat 3A with her 2 assistants. Her designer outfit and diamond jewelry sparkled under the cabin lights as she spoke loudly about her upcoming charity gala in Chicago. Marcus settled into seat 1A, spreading financial projections across his tray table. The documents detailed his company's expansion plans, including potential partnerships that could revolutionize regional air travel. His fingers traced over numbers representing thousands of jobs and billions in economic impact. This wasn't just business for Marcus. It was his life's work of creating opportunities in an industry that had historically excluded people who looked like him. Flight attendant Jessica Collins, a 28-year-old with 5 years of service, noticed the stark contrast immediately. Her trained eye assessed passengers for potential problems, a skill developed through countless flights. Something about the casual passenger in seat 1A didn't fit her mental image of first-class travelers. She whispered to her colleague Brian Matthews, pointing discreetly toward Marcus while discussing her concerns about a suspicious passenger. Captain Richard Hayes announced a 15-minute weather delay, giving passengers time to settle in. Marcus used the opportunity to review acquisition documents, unaware that his presence was already creating tension. He ordered coffee from Jessica, who served him with barely concealed reluctance. Her service lacked the warmth she showed other passengers, a subtle but unmistakable difference that Marcus noticed but chose to ignore. The morning sun streamed through oval windows as Marcus lost himself in financial forecasts. His phone buzzed with messages from executives across the country, all waiting for his decisions on deals that would reshape American aviation. He typed responses between sips of coffee, completely focused on the responsibilities that came with controlling 43% of domestic air travel. Margaret Whitfield's voice carried across the cabin as she discussed her husband's upcoming Senate committee hearings. Her conversation touched on immigration policy and urban crime, topics that made Marcus uncomfortable but weren't unusual for political wives. He had learned long ago to ignore such discussions, focusing instead on the work that had earned him respect in boardrooms worldwide. As the cabin filled with the soft hum of air conditioning and passenger conversations, Marcus had no idea he was about to become the center of a storm that would destroy one of America's oldest airlines. The document spread before him represented power beyond most people's imagination, yet in this moment, He was simply another traveler trying to reach his destination. Margaret Whitfield rose from her seat with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting her way. Her Chanel suit rustled as she approached Jessica Collins near the galley, her face displaying the practiced concern of a woman who had mastered the art of complaint. Behind her perfectly applied makeup, her eyes held a coldness that Marcus would soon experience firsthand. "Excuse me, dear," Margaret began, her southern accent dripping with false sweetness. "I need to speak with you about that man in first class." She gestured toward Marcus with a manicured finger, her diamond bracelet catching the cabin light. "I'm extremely uncomfortable with his presence here. He simply doesn't belong in this section." Jessica's posture straightened as she recognized the authority in Margaret's voice. The Whitfield name carried weight in political circles, and their frequent flyer status made them valuable customers. Jessica had been trained to prioritize passenger comfort, especially for VIP travelers who generated significant revenue for the airline. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Whitfield?" Jessica asked, her professional smile masking growing concern. She glanced toward Marcus, who remained absorbed in his documents, completely unaware of the conversation taking place 15 feet away. Margaret's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look at how he's dressed. Jeans and a hoodie in first class? It's completely inappropriate. My assistants and I paid premium prices for a premium experience, not to sit next to someone who looks like he belongs in coach." Her words carried the weight of entitlement earned through decades of privilege. "His behavior is making me nervous," Margaret continued, warming to her theme. "He keeps looking at documents and typing on his phone. It's suspicious behavior, and frankly, I don't feel safe. My husband is Senator Robert Whitfield, and we simply cannot tolerate this kind of environment." Jessica felt her pulse quicken as the complaint escalated. Senator Whitfield's name carried significant influence, and disappointing such a prominent family could have serious consequences for her career. She had witnessed other flight attendants face disciplinary action for failing to address VIP concerns promptly. "I understand your concerns completely," Jessica replied, her mind racing through possible solutions. "Let me see what I can do to resolve this situation immediately." She approached Marcus with determination, her training in conflict resolution temporarily forgotten in her eagerness to please the senator's wife. "Excuse me, sir," Jessica said, standing beside Marcus's seat with forced politeness. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's been a seating error in our system. You'll need to move to economy class." Her words came out more abruptly than intended, the stress of the situation affecting her usual diplomatic approach. Marcus looked up from his documents, confusion evident on his face. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" He reached for his boarding pass, clearly marked for seat 1A. "There must be some mistake. I specifically requested this seat when I booked the flight." Jessica's confidence wavered as she saw the first-class boarding pass, but Margaret's expectant gaze from across the cabin pushed her forward. "Our computer system shows an error in your booking. You'll need to gather your belongings and move to coach immediately." "That's impossible," Marcus replied calmly, his business training keeping his voice level despite growing frustration. "I booked this seat directly through your website and received confirmation. I need the workspace for important business documents." He gestured toward the papers spread across his tray table, each one worth millions to his company. Jessica's voice hardened as other passengers began noticing the confrontation. "Sir, I'm going to need you to comply with crew instructions. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have to call security." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, transforming a simple misunderstanding into something far more serious. Margaret Whitfield watched the scene unfold with satisfaction, her phone ready to document any resistance. She had successfully identified a problem and expected swift resolution. Her assistants flanked her like bodyguards, their presence adding weight to her complaints about feeling unsafe. Marcus felt the familiar sting of discrimination, a sensation he had hoped to leave behind as his success grew. Yet here, 30,000 feet above the ground, the same prejudices that had shaped his childhood were threatening to humiliate him once again. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was being ejected from a seat on an airline that depended on his company for survival. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Marcus said quietly, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. There's clearly been a misunderstanding that we can resolve professionally. His years of corporate negotiations had taught him the value of escalation when facing unreasonable demands. Jessica shook her head firmly. The captain is busy preparing for departure. You need to move now, or I'll have to call airport security. Her ultimatum echoed through the cabin, ensuring that every passenger witnessed Marcus's humiliation. The quiet businessman who controlled 43% of American air travel was about to learn that success meant nothing when prejudice took control. The situation escalated with frightening speed as Jessica Collins reached for the aircraft's communication system. Her finger hovered over the button that would summon security, a decision that would cost Skyline Air everything they had built over nearly 4 decades. Marcus Thompson remained seated, his documents scattered across the tray table like evidence of his legitimacy. Yet his calm demeanor seemed to infuriate rather than reassure the flight attendant. Security to gate B12. We have a disruptive passenger refusing to comply with crew instructions, Jessica announced, her voice carrying through the aircraft's intercom system. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, sealing the fate of everyone involved in this moment of catastrophic misjudgment. 2 airport security officers, James Rodriguez and Kevin Park, boarded the aircraft within minutes. Their imposing uniforms and serious expressions immediately shifted the cabin's atmosphere from uncomfortable tension to outright hostility. Years of training had taught them to trust crew assessments, and Jessica's description of a threatening passenger had prepared them for confrontation. "Sir, you need to come with us," Officer Rodriguez stated, his hand resting on his radio as he approached Marcus's seat. Behind him, Officer Park positioned himself strategically, blocking any potential escape route. Neither man bothered to examine boarding passes or question the circumstances that had led to their summoning. Marcus looked up from his documents, his expression showing disbelief at the rapid escalation. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. I'm seated in my assigned seat with a valid first-class boarding pass." He held up the document, its clear markings visible to anyone willing to look. "I'd like to resolve this with the gate agent or supervisor." "Step out of your seat now," Officer Park commanded, his voice carrying the authority of law enforcement. "The flight crew has requested your removal, and you're going to comply immediately." The officers had dealt with hundreds of similar situations, but they had never forcibly removed someone who would soon own their employer's assets. Fellow passengers throughout the cabin began recording on their smartphones, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. The contrast between Marcus's professional demeanor and the aggressive response he was receiving struck many as deeply wrong. Videos that would soon go viral were already capturing every moment of the injustice unfolding. Margaret Whitfield watched with satisfaction as her complaint generated results. She whispered to her assistants about the effectiveness of knowing the right people and making the right calls. Her sense of entitlement was complete. She had identified a problem and expected others to solve it regardless of the consequences, for the target of her discrimination. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said as he slowly gathered his documents. "I'm simply trying to understand why I'm being removed from a seat I legitimately purchased." His years of corporate leadership had taught him to remain composed under pressure, but the humiliation of being treated like a criminal was testing his restraint. Officer Rodriguez grasped Marcus's arm, applying pressure that would later appear in photographs posted across social media. "You can walk off this plane voluntarily, or we can carry you off. Your choice." The threat of physical force hung over the situation like a toxic cloud, ensuring that Marcus's dignity would be stripped away regardless of his response. Comment number 1: if you think Marcus should have fought back harder against this obvious discrimination. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more shocking stories of injustice. What do you think would have happened if Marcus had revealed his identity right there on the plane? The answer will absolutely blow your mind, so keep watching to see how this billionaire's patience led to the most expensive revenge in airline history. The walk down the aircraft aisle felt endless, as Marcus was escorted past rows of passengers recording his humiliation. Each step carried him further from his original destination and closer to a confrontation that would reshape the airline industry. Business documents worth billions fluttered from his hands as officers pushed him toward the exit, symbolic of the power he possessed but couldn't yet reveal. At the gate, Supervisor Linda Rodriguez, no relation to the security officer, appeared overwhelmed by the situation she was inheriting. Her training manual had no procedures for handling the removal of passengers who might actually own the airline. They were traveling on. She offered apologies that rang hollow while simultaneously defending her crew's actions. "Mr. Thompson, I sincerely apologize for this misunderstanding," Linda said, reading his name from the passenger manifest. "We can offer you a seat in economy on our next available flight to Chicago." Her words demonstrated the airline's complete failure to understand the magnitude of their error. Marcus accepted his belongings with quiet dignity, his mind already calculating the cost of this discrimination. "I'll need a full refund and complete documentation of this incident," he said calmly, "and I'd suggest you review your staff training procedures before someone gets seriously hurt by this kind of treatment." Linda nodded nervously, sensing something important in Marcus's demeanor, but unable to identify what it was. "Of course, sir. And might I suggest dressing more appropriately for first class in the future? It helps avoid these kinds of misunderstandings." Her words were the final insult, ensuring that Marcus would never forget the complete lack of respect he had received. Flight 447 departed on schedule, carrying Margaret Whitfield toward Chicago, while Marcus sat in the empty gate area. The quiet businessman who had been ejected from Seat 1A spent the next hour making phone calls that would destroy everything Skyline Air had built. His assistant Sarah Chen began fielding confused calls from business partners, while Marcus documented every detail of his humiliation for the legal proceedings that would follow. The videos posted by fellow passengers were already spreading across social media, generating thousands of comments about airline discrimination. Users shared stories of similar treatment while demanding accountability from Skyline Air. The airline's social media team remained blissfully unaware that they were about to face the greatest crisis in their company's history. Marcus Thompson sat alone in the terminal, surrounded by the remnants of his scattered documents, plotting a response that would cost Skyline Air $2.5 billion and change the airline industry forever. The man they had treated like a criminal was about to become their judge, jury, and executioner. 3 floors above the departure gates, in Skyline Air's Crisis Management Center, social media manager Patricia Kim was having what would later be described as the worst day of her professional career. Her multiple monitors displayed a growing storm of negative content that seemed to materialize from nowhere, threatening to engulf the airline's carefully maintained reputation in a tsunami of public outrage. The first video had appeared on Twitter within 20 minutes of Flight 447's departure. Shaky phone footage showed a well-dressed black man being forcibly removed from first class while maintaining remarkable composure. The caption read, "Skyline Air kicks paying customer out of first class for no reason. This is America in 2024. Within an hour, the video had been retweeted 12,000 times. Patricia's fingers flew across her keyboard as she tried to contain the damage, but new videos kept appearing from different angles. Passengers had captured every moment of Marcus's humiliation, creating a complete record of the airline's catastrophic failure. Comments poured in from celebrities, civil rights activists, and ordinary travelers sharing their own stories of discrimination. "This is escalating beyond anything I've seen," Patricia muttered, reaching for her phone to call CEO David Hamilton. She had managed social media crises before, but nothing approached the viral intensity of this incident. The airline's official accounts were being flooded with demands for explanations, refunds, and boycotts. 20 miles away in the executive boardroom, David Hamilton was reviewing quarterly projections when his phone rang. The 62-year-old CEO had built Skyline Air into a respected carrier through 30 years of steady leadership, but he was about to learn that his company's survival hung by a thread. "David, we have a serious problem," Patricia said, her voice tight with stress. "One of our crews removed a passenger from first class this morning, and the videos are going viral. We're getting destroyed on social media, and it's getting worse by the minute." Hamilton sighed, assuming he was dealing with another routine passenger complaint that had been blown out of proportion by social media. "Send me the details, and we'll issue a standard apology. Schedule a meeting with legal to discuss compensation, if necessary." "It's not that simple," Patricia replied. her voice rising with panic. "I ran the passenger manifest, and David, you need to sit down for this. The man we removed is Marcus Thompson of AeroVantage Holdings." The phone slipped from Hamilton's hand, clattering onto the polished conference table. Marcus Thompson wasn't just any passenger. He was arguably the most powerful man in American aviation. AeroVantage Holdings controlled partnerships that kept Skyline Air profitable, from route-sharing agreements to maintenance contracts worth hundreds of millions annually. "That's impossible," Hamilton whispered, retrieving his phone with trembling fingers. "Marcus Thompson has his own jets. Why would he be flying commercial?" Even as he asked the question, he knew the answer. Thompson was famous for his hands-on management style and monthly commercial flights to understand customer experience. Patricia's voice cracked as she delivered more devastating news. "The videos show everything, David. Our flight attendant, Jessica Collins, accused him of not belonging in first class. Security physically removed him while he tried to show his boarding pass. The passenger who complained was Margaret Whitfield, and she's on video celebrating after he was ejected." Hamilton's mind raced through the implications as board members began calling his assistant. Skyline Air's partnership agreements with AeroVantage came up for renewal in 6 months, contracts that represented 37% of the airline's annual revenue. Without those deals, the company would face immediate bankruptcy. "Get me Marcus Thompson on the phone immediately," Hamilton ordered, his usual calm demeanor cracking under pressure. "Send flowers, fruit baskets, whatever it takes. We need to contain this before it destroys everything we've built." Meanwhile, 40 floors above downtown Atlanta, Marcus Thompson sat in his corner office reviewing the partnership agreements that would soon become weapons of financial destruction. His assistant Sarah Chen fielded increasingly frantic calls from Skyline Air executives while Marcus met with his legal team to document every detail of his humiliation. "They've tried calling 17 times in the past hour," Sarah reported, her professional composure hiding her amazement at the situation. "David Hamilton left increasingly desperate voicemails, and their legal department is requesting an emergency meeting." Marcus smiled grimly as he signed termination notices that had been prepared within hours of his return to Atlanta. His legal team had worked with military precision, identifying every contract, partnership, and agreement that connected Skyline Air to the AeroVantage empire. The documents represented financial relationships built over 15 years, all about to disappear because of one flight attendant's prejudice. "Let them call," Marcus said calmly. "Right now, they're still thinking this is a customer service issue they can resolve with apologies and compensation. They have no idea that they just declared war on someone who controls their lifeline." Attorney Jennifer Walsh spread the termination documents across Marcus's desk like a battle plan. "These contracts have 30-day cancellation clauses for cause. Discrimination against company executives certainly qualifies as cause." Her voice carried satisfaction as she explained how Skyline Air's own legal language would be used against them. Chief Financial Officer Robert Kim entered with laptop computers displaying real-time financial data. "Skyline Air's stock is down 12% since the videos went viral. They've lost $400 million in market value in 6 hours. The numbers told a story of investor panic as the market began understanding the magnitude of Skyline Air's error." Marcus stood at his office windows, looking down at the city where he had built his empire from nothing. 30 years earlier, he had been denied his first airline job because of his race. Today, he controlled the fate of the company that had just repeated that same discrimination. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the opportunity for industry-wide change. "Prepare a press conference for tomorrow morning," Marcus instructed his communications team. "It's time for Skyline Air to learn the true cost of discrimination, and it's time for the entire industry to understand that this behavior will no longer be tolerated." David Hamilton's office had transformed into a war room by Tuesday evening, with crisis management consultants, legal advisors, and communications specialists working frantically to contain a disaster that seemed to grow more catastrophic by the hour. The mahogany conference table was covered with laptops, legal documents, and printed social media posts that painted a damning picture of institutional discrimination. "We need a complete timeline of events," Hamilton demanded, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled after hours of emergency meetings. "I want to know every word spoken, every decision made, and every policy that was either followed or violated during Flight 447's boarding process." Legal advisor Michael Torres spread witness statements across the table like evidence at a trial. Jessica Collins admits to moving Thompson based solely on Margaret Whitfield's complaint. She made no attempt to verify the complaint's legitimacy or follow standard passenger dispute procedures. Security was called within minutes, with no supervisor consultation or documentation review. The investigation revealed a cascade of policy violations that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances, but were potentially fatal given the passenger's identity. Flight attendant training manuals clearly stated that passenger disputes required supervisor approval before involving security, yet Jessica had skipped every protection designed to prevent exactly this situation. "Where's Jessica now?" Hamilton asked, already knowing the answer would bring more bad news. His human resources director, Maria Santos, looked uncomfortable as she delivered her report. "We terminated her employment this afternoon, but she's already granted interviews to 3 news outlets," Maria replied. "She's claiming she followed company policy and that the passenger was acting suspiciously. She specifically mentioned his clothing and behavior as justification for her actions." Hamilton closed his eyes, imagining how Jessica's defensive statements would play in the media. Every word she spoke in her own defense would reinforce the narrative of racial profiling and institutional bias. Her attempts to justify her actions were digging Skyline Air's grave deeper with each interview. Chief Operating Officer Lisa Chen brought more devastating news from the operational side. "We've received cancellation notices from 14 corporate accounts today. They're specifically citing the incident as incompatible with their diversity and inclusion values. We're looking at immediate revenue loss of $67 million annually." The domino effect was accelerating beyond anyone's worst projections. Major corporations were distancing themselves from Skyline Air to protect their own reputations, creating a financial hemorrhage that would be difficult to stop even under the best circumstances. With Marcus Thompson controlling their most important partnerships, the situation appeared hopeless. "What about Thompson?" Hamilton asked desperately. "Has anyone actually spoken with him directly?" His staff exchanged uncomfortable glances, knowing that their attempts to reach the AeroVantage CEO had been systematically blocked by his executive team. Communications Director Robert Park delivered the crushing answer. His office released a statement saying Mr. Thompson is reviewing all business relationships for compatibility with AeroVantage's values. They're not taking calls, not scheduling meetings, and not responding to our apology letters. The statement was corporate speak for a death sentence. When Marcus Thompson reviewed business relationships, companies either emerged stronger or disappeared entirely. Skyline Air's fate was being decided in boardrooms they couldn't access, by a man they had humiliated beyond any reasonable expectation of forgiveness. Federal transportation officials had announced their own investigation, adding regulatory pressure to the financial and public relations disasters already consuming the airline. Civil rights organizations were demanding congressional hearings, while aviation unions called for industry-wide anti-discrimination training requirements. "The senator's wife," Torres said quietly, referring to Margaret Whitfield. "She's become a liability we can't control. Every interview she gives makes our situation worse." Margaret had appeared on 2 news programs, defending her complaint, while demonstrating exactly the kind of privileged entitlement that had created the crisis. Hamilton reviewed the financial projections that painted an increasingly grim picture. "How long can we survive if AeroVantage cancels our partnerships?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. CFO Jennifer Blake's response confirmed his worst fears. 30 to 45 days before we're forced into bankruptcy proceedings. Our credit lines are already under review, and aircraft lease payments become problematic without the revenue those partnerships generate. The room fell silent as the magnitude of their situation became clear. A single passenger complaint, handled with prejudice and arrogance, had put 37 years of business success at risk. Thousands of employees faced unemployment because, One flight attendant couldn't see past the color of a passenger's skin. "Keep trying to reach Thompson," Hamilton ordered, knowing the attempt was futile but unable to accept defeat. "Offer him controlling interest in the company if necessary. Whatever it takes to prevent total destruction." Outside the conference room windows, Atlanta's skyline sparkled in the evening light. But inside Skyline Air's headquarters, the atmosphere was funeral. The airline that had once seemed invincible was learning that in modern America, discrimination carried a price tag measured in billions, and Marcus Thompson was about to present the bill. Wednesday morning brought no relief to Skyline Air's mounting crisis, but it did bring Marcus Thompson to the podium of the downtown Atlanta Press Club, where television cameras and reporters from major news outlets had gathered to hear from the man at the center of the aviation industry's biggest story. The quiet businessman who had been humiliated less than 24 hours earlier was about to deliver a master class in strategic corporate warfare. Marcus stood behind the podium, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit, his calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the chaos he was about to unleash. Behind him, a screen displayed the Aero Vantage Holdings logo, a reminder to everyone present that they were dealing with one of the most powerful executives in American aviation. "Yesterday, I experienced something that no paying customer should ever face," Marcus began, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him a legend in boardrooms worldwide. "I was discriminated against, humiliated, and physically removed from a seat I had legitimately purchased solely because of my race and appearance." The packed room listened in absolute silence as Marcus detailed every moment of his experience, from Margaret Whitfield's complaint to his forcible removal by security. His recounting was methodical and precise, the testimony of a witness who understood the legal implications of every word he spoke. "This incident reveals systemic problems that extend far beyond one flight attendant's poor judgment," Marcus continued. "It demonstrates institutional bias that has no place in modern aviation or any other industry. Therefore, effective immediately, Aero Vantage Holdings is terminating all partnership agreements with Skyline Air and its subsidiaries." The announcement hit the aviation industry like a seismic shock. Reporters' phones buzzed with alerts as Skyline Air's stock price began its death spiral, losing 37% of its value within minutes of Marcus's statement. The termination of Aero Vantage partnerships meant the immediate loss of profitable routes, maintenance contracts, and gate leases that formed the backbone of Skyline Air's operations. "These terminated agreements represent $2.5 billion in annual business," Marcus explained, his tone remaining conversational despite the devastating nature of his announcement. "This decision affects 43% of Skyline Air's SAO route network and will require them to renegotiate aircraft maintenance at significantly higher costs." In Skyline Air's Crisis Management Center, David Hamilton watched the press conference with the resignation of a condemned man. Each word from Marcus's mouth represented another nail in his company's coffin, delivered with the precision of someone who understood exactly how to destroy an airline from the inside out. "He's not just canceling contracts," Hamilton muttered to his assembled staff. "He's systematically eliminating every source of revenue that keeps us profitable. This isn't business anymore, it's execution." The press conference continued as Marcus outlined his broader vision for industry change. Aero Vantage Holdings will work with civil rights organizations to establish new standards for passenger treatment across all airlines. "We will not tolerate discrimination in any form, and companies that fail to meet these standards will find themselves without our partnerships." Comment number 1 if you think Marcus's response was perfectly justified, or comment number 2 if you think he went too far. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of justice served. Do you think Skyline Air deserved to be destroyed for one employee's mistake? The answer might surprise you as this story takes an even more shocking turn. The financial markets responded with brutal efficiency to Marcus's announcement. Skyline Air's competitors saw their stock prices rise as investors anticipated the acquisition of valuable routes and aircraft at bankruptcy prices. The airline industry was already positioning itself to divide Skyline Air's assets among surviving carriers. Senator Robert Whitfield, meanwhile, was dealing with his own crisis as his wife's role in the incident became national news. Political allies distanced themselves from any association with racial discrimination, while opposition candidates prepared campaign advertisements featuring Margaret Whitfield's celebration of Marcus's removal. "My husband's political career is over," Margaret confided to friends, finally understanding the consequences of her privileged outburst. The woman who had felt entitled to remove a fellow passenger was discovering that actions have consequences, even for the wives of powerful politicians. Back at the press conference, Marcus fielded questions with the expertise of someone who had spent decades managing hostile shareholders and skeptical business partners. His responses were measured and professional, but the underlying message was clear: discrimination would be punished swiftly and completely. "This isn't about revenge," Marcus explained to a reporter who questioned the severity of his response. "This is about establishing consequences for behavior that has been tolerated too long. When an airline treats paying customers like criminals, based on their race, that airline doesn't deserve to survive." The press conference concluded with Marcus announcing the establishment of the Thompson Institute for Aviation Equality, funded by the anticipated profits from acquiring Skyline Air's assets at bankruptcy prices. The institute would provide training, scholarships, and advocacy to ensure that no traveler would face the discrimination he had experienced. As news crews packed their equipment and reporters filed stories that would dominate evening news cycles across the country, Marcus Thompson walked away from the podium knowing he had just changed the airline industry forever. The quiet businessman who had been ejected from seat 1A had become the most powerful voice for aviation equality in American history. Skyline Air's death spiral was now irreversible, but Marcus's victory was about more than corporate revenge. He had transformed personal humiliation into industry-wide reform, ensuring that future generations of travelers would be judged by their character rather than their appearance. By Thursday morning, Skyline Air's operational collapse had begun in earnest, transforming David Hamilton's once proud airline into a case study of how quickly corporate empires can crumble when they lose their most essential partnerships. The termination of AeroVantage agreements had triggered a cascade of failures that no amount of damage control could prevent or repair. Flight Operations Center Manager Carlos Rodriguez stared at computer screens displaying a nightmare scenario of canceled routes and stranded passengers. "We've lost access to 23 international destinations effective immediately," he reported to the Emergency Operations Committee. "Our code-sharing agreements are void, and we can't legally sell tickets for flights we can't actually operate." The most profitable routes in Skyline Air's network had disappeared overnight, leaving the airline with domestic flights that barely covered operational costs. International passengers who had booked connecting flights found themselves stranded in airports across the country, their tickets suddenly worthless pieces of paper. "Maintenance contracts are terminating faster than we can replace them," reported Chief Maintenance Officer Diana Park. "AeroVantage subsidiaries handled 67% of our aircraft servicing. We're looking at maintenance costs increasing by 300%, assuming we can find alternative providers willing to work with us." The financial implications were staggering. Aircraft that had been profitable under AeroVantage's bulk maintenance agreements were now economic disasters, requiring expensive individual contracts. Several planes would need to be grounded permanently because maintaining them had become prohibitively expensive. Corporate accounts continued fleeing Skyline Air at an unprecedented rate. Major companies that had relied on the airline for business travel were canceling contracts worth millions annually, citing incompatibility with their diversity policies. The discrimination incident had become a litmus test for corporate values, and Skyline Air was failing spectacularly. "Johnson & Associates just canceled their contract," reported Corporate Sales Director Michelle Wong. "That's $4.7 million in annual revenue gone." They specifically mentioned the Thompson incident as incompatible with their commitment to racial equality. The pattern was repeating across the country as corporations chose reputation over convenience. Human Resources Director Maria Santos brought more devastating news from the employee front. "We've received resignation letters from 47 pilots and 200 flight attendants. They're citing embarrassment about working for a company associated with racial discrimination. The exodus of experienced personnel was creating operational problems beyond the financial disaster." Hamilton reviewed bankruptcy legal documents that his attorneys had prepared as a contingency measure, though everyone knew contingency had become inevitability. "How long before we're forced to file?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. 2 weeks, possibly 3. replied CFO Jennifer Blake. Our credit lines are being called in early. Aircraft leases are under review for default, and we can't meet payroll obligations beyond the end of the month. The timeline for destruction was accelerating beyond anyone's projections. Meanwhile, AeroVantage Holdings was receiving dozens of calls from airlines eager to acquire Skyline Air's most valuable assets at fire sale prices. Marcus Thompson's strategy was working perfectly, creating a buyer's market for everything from aircraft to airport gates, while ensuring that discrimination carried financial consequences. Margaret Whitfield had become a national symbol of entitled racism, her image appearing in memes and social media posts about privilege and prejudice. Death threats forced her into hiding while her husband's Senate re-election campaign collapsed under the weight of association with her actions. "I never meant for any of this to happen," Margaret sobbed during a phone call with her sister. "I just wanted him moved to coach. I didn't know he was important." Her words revealed the depth of her misunderstanding. She still believed Marcus's importance came from his wealth rather than his basic human dignity. Jessica Collins, the flight attendant whose discrimination had triggered the crisis, found herself unemployable in aviation and facing personal bankruptcy as legal bills mounted. Her attempts to justify her actions had only made her situation worse, transforming her from a working professional into a national symbol of workplace discrimination. "I was just following my training," Jessica insisted during yet another disastrous media interview. Passengers complained and I responded appropriately. Her inability to recognize her own bias had made her the face of systemic discrimination in American aviation. The Federal Aviation Administration announced comprehensive reviews of passenger treatment policies across all airlines, while civil rights organizations demanded congressional hearings on discrimination in transportation. Marcus Thompson's experience had become a catalyst for industry-wide examination of practices that had been hidden for decades. "This isn't just about Skyline Air anymore," explained civil rights attorney Benjamin Foster during a news conference. "This incident has exposed problems throughout the aviation industry. We're demanding systematic changes to ensure that no passenger ever faces this kind of treatment again." As Skyline Air's collapse accelerated, Marcus Thompson was quietly positioning AeroVantage Holdings to acquire the airline's most valuable assets. The man who had been humiliated in Seat 1A was about to own the company that had discriminated against him, transforming personal injustice into corporate ownership through the power of strategic thinking and unlimited financial resources. The airline industry watched in fascination and horror as one of its oldest carriers disintegrated because of a single moment of prejudice. Skyline Air's destruction was becoming a textbook example of how discrimination could destroy even the most established companies when they encountered someone with the power to demand accountability. Friday morning brought the inevitable conclusion to Skyline Air's corporate death spiral, as emergency board meetings convened in conference rooms filled with resignation letters, bankruptcy documents, and the unmistakable atmosphere of institutional collapse. David Hamilton faced his board of directors for what everyone knew would be his final meeting as CEO of the airline he had spent 30 years building. "The situation is beyond recovery," Hamilton admitted, his voice hollow with defeat. "We've lost 78% of our profitable routes, maintenance costs have tripled, and employee departures are accelerating daily. Bankruptcy filing is no longer a question of if, but when." Board Chairman William Sterling reviewed financial projections that painted an apocalyptic picture of corporate destruction. "Our legal obligations exceed our assets by approximately $800 million. Even liquidation won't cover our debts." The numbers told the story of an airline that had been financially murdered by its own discrimination. Meanwhile, Marcus Thompson was conducting his own board meeting 40 floors above downtown Atlanta, where AeroVantage Holdings executive committee was reviewing acquisition opportunities that had emerged from Skyline Air's collapse. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room that the man who had been ejected from first class was about to own first-class assets at bankruptcy prices. "Skyline Air's board has requested an emergency meeting," reported AeroVantage's chief strategy officer Patricia Wong. "They're prepared to offer controlling interest in the company as compensation for the discrimination incident." The desperation in their offer was palpable, but everyone knew Marcus's response before he spoke. "Decline," Marcus said calmly. We're not interested in owning a company built on discriminatory practices. We'll acquire their assets after bankruptcy and rebuild with proper values. His decision sealed Skyline Air's fate while ensuring that a new airline would rise from its ashes with equality as its foundation. The Federal Aviation Administration's investigation had revealed systematic problems throughout Skyline Air's operations, from inadequate diversity training to policies that enabled discriminatory behavior. The airline's operating certificate was under review, adding regulatory pressure to the financial catastrophe already destroying the company. Senator Robert Whitfield's political career officially ended when his primary challenger released campaign advertisements featuring his wife's celebration of Marcus's removal. Voters rejected politicians associated with racial discrimination, sending a clear message about the electoral consequences of prejudice in modern America. "My husband lost by 37 percentage points," Margaret Whitfield confided to her lawyer. 30 years of political service destroyed because I couldn't tolerate sitting near a black man in first class. Her words captured the personal cost of discrimination while demonstrating her continued failure to understand the broader implications of her actions. Jessica Collins attempted suicide in her apartment Tuesday evening, overwhelmed by unemployment, legal bills, and death threats from strangers who had seen her discrimination broadcast worldwide. She survived and was hospitalized, eventually becoming an advocate against workplace discrimination after understanding her role in perpetuating systemic racism. "I destroyed everything because I couldn't see past someone's appearance," Jessica would later tell audiences at diversity seminars. "I let my prejudices blind me to basic human dignity, and the consequences destroyed not just my life, but thousands of others." Her transformation from perpetrator to advocate became a powerful example of personal growth through tragedy. AeroVantage Holdings announced plans to hire qualified Skyline Air employees who demonstrated commitment to equality and customer service, offering severance packages and retraining programs for displaced workers. Marcus's approach to the acquisition focused on preserving jobs while eliminating the culture that had enabled discrimination. "We're not just buying assets," Marcus explained to his staff. "We're rebuilding an airline industry that treats all passengers with dignity and respect." This acquisition represents an opportunity to demonstrate that equality and profitability can coexist successfully. The aviation industry implemented emergency anti-discrimination training programs as airlines rushed to avoid Skyline Air's fate. Marcus Thompson's experience had become required reading in business schools as an example of how dignity, patience, and strategic thinking could transform personal injustice into industry-wide reform. Civil rights organizations praised the broader changes emerging from the crisis, while aviation unions negotiated new contracts including stronger anti-discrimination protections. The incident had catalyzed reforms that had been needed for decades, but required a catalyst powerful enough to force immediate change. As Friday evening approached, Skyline Air filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, officially ending 37 years of operations. The airline that had once served millions of passengers annually was destroyed by one flight attendant's inability to see past racial stereotypes, demonstrating the ultimate cost of discrimination in corporate America. Marcus Thompson spent the evening reviewing acquisition plans that would transform Skyline Air's assets into the foundation for a new airline built on principles of equality and excellence. The quiet businessman who had been humiliated in Seat 1A was about to revolutionize an industry that had discriminated against him since childhood. 6 months after Marcus Thompson was forcibly removed from Seat 1A, he stood in the gleaming headquarters of Thompson Airways, the airline he had built from Skyline Air's ashes in downtown Atlanta. The building's lobby featured a bronze plaque commemorating the incident that had transformed personal humiliation into industry-wide revolution, serving as a permanent reminder that discrimination carries consequences beyond imagination. The transformation had been swift and comprehensive. Thompson Airways operated with Skyline Air's former aircraft and routes, but with a corporate culture built on equality, respect, and excellence in customer service. Employee training programs, developed by civil rights organizations, ensured that no passenger would ever face the discrimination Marcus had experienced. "We've exceeded all first-year projections," reported Chief Financial Officer Sandra Kim during the quarterly board meeting. Customer satisfaction ratings are the highest in industry history, and our diversity initiatives have become the gold standard for aviation excellence. The numbers told the story of an airline that proved profitability and principles could coexist successfully. Former Skyline Air employees who had demonstrated integrity during the crisis had been rehired with improved benefits and equity positions in the new company. The airline's workforce reflected America's diversity while maintaining the highest professional standards in aviation history. Margaret Whitfield spent her court-ordered community service working at minority-owned businesses in Atlanta, slowly, learning to understand the impact of her privileged prejudices. The woman who had felt entitled to remove a fellow passenger was discovering the humanity she had never bothered to see. "I destroyed my family because I couldn't tolerate sitting near someone who looked different," Margaret reflected during a mandated counseling session. "I'm learning that privilege isn't about controlling others. It's about using advantages to help rather than harm." Her transformation was painful but genuine, demonstrating that even the most prejudiced individuals could change when forced to confront their biases. David Hamilton drove for a ride-sharing service in suburban Atlanta. His aviation career permanently ended by his failure to protect passengers from discrimination. The former CEO who had built Skyline Air into a major carrier learned humility. Through service to others, often driving passengers to the airport where his former company had once operated, Jessica Collins had become a powerful advocate against workplace discrimination, speaking at corporate training seminars about the personal and professional costs of prejudice. Her presentations focused on recognizing unconscious bias and the importance of treating every customer with dignity regardless of appearance. "I let my assumptions destroy thousands of jobs and ruin countless lives," Jessica told audiences at diversity conferences. "I'm living proof that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically devastating for everyone involved." Her message resonated with employees across industries who recognized their own potential for similar mistakes. The Thompson Institute for Aviation Equality had trained over 50,000 airline employees in anti-discrimination practices, while providing scholarships for underrepresented students pursuing aviation careers. The Institute's research had identified and eliminated discriminatory practices throughout the transportation industry. Marcus Thompson's story became required curriculum in business schools worldwide, studied as an example of how strategic thinking and moral courage could transform personal injustice into systemic change. His approach demonstrated that the most effective response to discrimination wasn't anger, but calculated action that created lasting reform. This incident taught America that discrimination carries consequences, Marcus explained during a Harvard Business School lecture. When companies fail to treat customers with basic dignity, they risk losing everything they've built. The market rewards equality and punishes prejudice, but only when victims have the power to demand accountability. Thompson Airways had become the most profitable airline in American history, while maintaining the industry's best safety record and highest customer satisfaction ratings. The company proved that treating passengers with respect wasn't just morally correct, it was financially superior to discriminatory practices. Federal legislation named the Thompson Act required anti-discrimination training for all transportation employees, while civil rights organizations used Marcus's experience as a template for holding corporations accountable for discriminatory behavior. The airline industry had been permanently transformed by one man's refusal to accept injustice quietly. As Marcus stood in his office overlooking the Atlanta skyline, he reflected on the journey from humiliation to triumph that had begun in Seat 1A. The quiet businessman who had been treated like a criminal now employed over 60,000 people while shaping aviation policy nationwide. What do you think about Marcus Thompson's incredible journey from discrimination to industry domination? Comment below with your thoughts on whether his response was justified, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this amazing story with friends who need to hear it. Have you ever experienced discrimination that changed your life? Your stories matter, and we'd love to hear them in the comments. Thank you for watching this incredible tale of justice, perseverance, and the ultimate triumph of dignity over prejudice. Until next time, remember that every action has consequences, and sometimes those consequences can change the world. Keep fighting for what's right, and never underestimate the power of quiet determination in the face of injustice. Marcus Thompson's story teaches us that discrimination isn't just morally wrong, it's economically catastrophic. When Jessica Collins let racial bias cloud her judgment, she didn't just humiliate one passenger. She destroyed thousands of jobs and eliminated billions in shareholder value. This incident demonstrates how unconscious prejudice can manifest in everyday situations, turning routine interactions into life-changing disasters. The story reveals the hidden power dynamics in modern America, where success doesn't automatically shield individuals from racism. Marcus's wealth and influence were invisible to those who judged him solely by appearance, proving that discrimination affects people at every level of society. His response shows the importance of strategic thinking over emotional reaction when facing injustice. Corporate accountability emerges as a central theme, illustrating how companies must actively combat discriminatory practices rather than simply avoiding them. Skyline Air's passive approach to diversity training created the conditions for disaster, while Thomson Airways' proactive equality measures generated unprecedented success. Most importantly, this story demonstrates that individual actions have collective consequences. Margaret Whitfield's entitled complaint didn't just inconvenience one passenger, it transformed an entire industry. When people with privilege use that advantage to harm others, the reverberations extend far beyond their intended targets, ultimately destroying the very systems they sought to protect. Have you ever witnessed discrimination in your workplace or community? What would you have done in Marcus Thompson's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you think his response was proportional to the injustice he faced. If this story opened your eyes to the real cost of racism, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true stories that reveal how individual courage can change entire industries. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who needs to understand that dignity isn't negotiable, and justice sometimes comes with a price tag. Thank you for watching and supporting content that highlights both the persistence of discrimination and the power of strategic response. Remember, every voice matters in the fight for equality, and your engagement helps spread these important messages to audiences who need to hear them most.